Hey everyone, this is Chris Davis, your video and feature producer here at 4Player. Happy New Year! Here are my top 10 games of 2022. Squeaking onto my list this year is probably the most divisive choice I could possibly offer. The next game from Tango Gameworks, and decidedly not the conclusion to the Evil Within trilogy we needed, Ghostwire Tokyo. Now, I readily realize that few, if any, Game of the Year lists out there will include the last of the Bethesda games to arrive before the closure of Microsoft's acquisition deal, but I certainly want to apologize for its presence here. Ghostwire has continued to be a game that I've thought about fondly for the past 9 months. I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for the game's many considerable shortcomings here, but Ghostwire's atmosphere and narrative setup speaks directly to me. As Ikumi Nakamura so bashfully spoke during the game's formal announcement years ago, the game is indeed spooky, but while not delving into the horrific origins that Tango's foundational franchise is known for, there certainly were plenty of moments throughout in which I got the chills. Considering the gameplay and world design itself, the raptured district of Shibuya the game is set in is immaculately recreated, and it unapologetically dives deep into Japanese culture and mysticism in measures that I feel we don't really see outside of a Yakuza title that often. The game's unique combat system, while laggy and offering little variation, is just so interesting by design to me that it overcomes its gameplay limitations. I love the idea of using hand signs and gestures to combat and manipulate the roaming evil spirits that have infested the city, and it feels so satisfying to crush their cores and, in turn, empower the player. If I had to mention a specific regret I have about Ghostwire, it would have to be about Tango's usage of Ubisoft-style open-world collectathoning of items, trinkets, and side quests that feel far shorter and underdeveloped than one would have expected or hoped for. However, I still cannot dismiss how much fun I had fighting ghosts, exploring Shibuya, and experiencing the narrative. At the end of the day, while I think that Ghostwire Tokyo is worth the time and energy to experience, I fully understand and agree that it's not a full realization of Tango's strong talent and potential. I wish them the best, and hope that the mixed reception redirects their efforts toward proper Evil Within 3. But for now, Ghostwire Tokyo has just barely cut the mustard enough to get on my annual list. I was fairly late in jumping on the love train everyone's already boarded for Playdead, the celebrated and very infrequent indie studio behind Limbo and Inside. Though I didn't play Limbo, I certainly played the hell out of Inside, and well, that's a heck of a game, man. When I used infrequent as an adjective to describe Playdead, though, I was perhaps being a little generous. In its decade-and-a-half lifespan, the studio has only put out these 2 games, with Inside having been released 6 years ago. So when the trailer for Somerville premiered last year, it was fair to assume that this was their Project 3. Turns out, not as such. While Somerville has some Playdead blood in it thanks to the presence of Dina Pati, the previous co-founder of Playdead and EP on those projects, this is the freshman title for Jump Ship, a co-venture between Pati and Chris Olsen, an animator who has contributed to a number of films over years. And man, is this a hell of a premiere project for the studio. Somerville drops you into its story right at the cusp of an alien invasion somewhere in the English countryside. Playing as a husband and father, you are knocked out during the opening moments of the bombardment and awaken the following morning, with your family having long since fled. From there, it's a simple, wordless journey to find them and somehow survive the invasion. And that's honestly all there is to this game's story. You make your way through the countryside, scavenging, surviving, and evading the various invaders you encounter along the way. But holy crap, what a journey it is. Though the game could be completed in the better part of a single afternoon, Somerville is just a visually stunning tale from start to finish, with an appropriately divisive but clever set of endings that I won't go into spoilers about, but suffice to say, are more about understanding and acceptance than simply duking it out with a bunch of aliens. That isn't to say that the brief combat and chase sequences are something to be downplayed. Rather, they arrive at just the right moments and have an intensity that really drives the player forward. It's this intensity that I think I'm the most in love with Somerville. Thanks to its simplified art style and an exceptional sound design set, these moments of hiding or running from the aliens will really raise your blood pressure. The opening moments of the game set the tone of what to expect from the scenes, and to me, all of them live up to that expectation. I guess what I'm struggling with here is that it's hard to describe this short, largely vocalless story without going into spoilers, which I absolutely refuse to do. All I will say is that if Somerville is something you intend to play, pay attention to the little things you find along the way. There's far, far more going on than you would expect. It's a great game, a fantastic debut for Jumpship, and easily one of my favorites in 2022. There's always a game that finds its way onto my list in the last days before we do production on these videos. It's just a fact of life for me. While my hopes for that entry being the Callisto Protocol were dashed due to a wealth of problems, fate found a way to give me a proper substitute in the form of Potionomics, a delightful little game from freshman developer Voracious Games. And if this title is any indication as to the quality of an experience they can bring to the table, then they're going to be a developer that we're going to need to be following in the years to come. 2022 was strangely awash with fantasy merchant games for some inexplicable reason. And while I didn't find myself putting in any time with the others, Potionomics grabbed my eye thanks to its DreamWorks-esque art style and lively animations, and kept me engaged thanks to its challenging gameplay loop. As a mercantile simulator, said loop is exactly what you expect. Buy and collect ingredients, brew your potions with said ingredients, and sell them at considerable markups to your customers. What I didn't expect, however, was a narrative involving death, indentured servitude, and a colorful cast of companions and antagonists. While it's not nearly as dark as I'm depicting it as, it does well to be as family-friendly as it can be while skirting the line between E10 and a teen rating. Still though, the conversations that you will have with your friends and potential love interests run a gambit of mature topics while succeeding in not bringing down the moment. In particular, I found myself drawn to Quinn, your ingredients merchant who sells items out of a domesticated mimic, and to Zid, a bardic rock star laying low at the local Heroes Guild. Apart from the narrative though, the gameplay loop of Potionomics is just as fun as it can be challenging. Spread out across 50 days, every 10 days you are poised to participate in a competition against another potion brewer, in the hopes of winning the prize money to spend on settling your debt that you inherited from your dead uncle, lest you lose your potion shop and, more crucially, your soul to the local bank that financed him. In the 9-day run-up to the competition, though, you go through the loop of gathering ingredients through purchases and quest expeditions that you commission, using the ingredients to brew potions of ever-increasing quality, and sell those that you don't need to your customers. It's in this last part that the game throws at you a deck builder mechanic as you haggle with customers to raise the price of your products to the highest degree possible, while maintaining their patience lest you lose out on a sale. The cards you deploy are earned by building relationships with the side characters I mentioned previously, with the results lending you a good number of possible builds for your deck and potential strategies to work by. It's honestly quite fun. In the over 30 hours that I put into the game, I found myself challenged but not frustrated by the drive to get just the right ingredient combinations necessary to earn bonus quality stars to increase the price and brew up competition-worthy potions. By the end of the game, I was getting my potions done well in advance of the competition, and spending the rest of the time building up my cash reserves, meeting up with my friends, and sending them off on increasingly more difficult quests for even rarer ingredients. Potionomics is some considerable fun. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it, but my only regret being that there's just one set ending and no endless sandbox mode. In fact, that's the most common complaint about the game on Steam. And if that's your main issue that people have with it, not being able to play it enough, then you know you have a good experience on hand. If you're in the mood for something a little different that's delightfully animated, filled with fun writing, and puzzling to play, then Potionomics is definitely worth your time. I will readily admit that I am certainly not one for a fighting game nor a brawler unless it happens to have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the name. Sifu, however, is another story. Coming from French developer Slowclap, this game dazzled me earlier in the year and led me to not only beat it once, but twice. But more on that in a moment. Slowclap, known for their work on the multiplayer fighting game Absolver from 2017, used their foundational experience there to build an intricate single-player combat system that is almost stunningly good. But as Nick talked about in his video, spoiler alert, Sifu is more than its combat system. It's a very arcade roguelite brawler that can be just as rewarding as it is punishing, thanks to its focus on the game's signature aging mechanic, where falling in battle advances your life in years, exchanging youth and vitality for power and enhanced combat prowess. It's a smart implementation of a time limit. Defeat your 5 antagonist bosses before you die of old age. And it's awesomely done, thanks to the counterbalance of saving your youngest age at the completion of a level during a run and the usage of a progression system that allows you to build out your attack repertoire over time. This results in a strong replayability and the resulting mastering of the game's lessons to a degree that I can't say I've ever seen before. This is to say nothing of the game's usage of unlocks and items found at different stages, which in turn open up new side paths and shortcuts in other levels. It's all smartly put together and addicting to engage in. Again, by now you've already heard this from so many others speaking Sifu's praises, but I would be remiss if I failed to allude to the game's greatest secret. I won't go into details, but suffice to say, hidden within the game's core mechanics is an alternate arrangement for the completion of your runs, which completely took me by surprise once I finished the game, and immediately threw me back into the fray for a second full playthrough. It's pretty awesome. Sifu is a game I would highly recommend for those looking for a good roguelite experience, or perhaps someone with a strong love for fighting games. Now, is it for the average player? Honestly, probably not. With that being said, this is one of those games that you should not feel any sense of embarrassment or remorse about playing on a lower difficulty level. Punishment is the name of the game here. So a lot of patience and playing through levels over and over and over again are the orders of the day in trying to defeat the game. I really, really like Sifu, and I'm supremely interested to see what Slowclap comes up with next. Have you ever played a game that was specifically designed just for you? I'm talking about a title that speaks to your love of a specific franchise or medium of entertainment and engages in that design to a level you just don't see. Or perhaps it's a loving tribute to an obscure, rarely talked about game from your childhood, which, while certainly far from being a good game, is one that stuck with you as you grew up. Well, this happened for me in 2022, and that game is called Kaiju Wars. Coming to us from Canadian developer Foolish Mortals, a studio with less staff on hand than letters in its name, Kaiju Wars, as you can see, is a turn-based tactics game where you can play as the humans trying to fight off invading kaiju across a variety of maps within a lengthy campaign, complete with overarching narrative filled to the brim with genre references and dumb but funny writing. What immediately made this game a day one purchase for me, though, came from my initial discovery of it during a Steam Next Fest in 2021, in which the game utilized a music track from Godzilla 2 on the NES as a placeholder for a specific gameplay event. I was honestly shocked at what I was hearing, and in my reaching out to them, I confirmed that not only was Kaiju Wars a tribute to that very game, the final product would contain a tribute screen to that same game, as well as full recreations of that game's suite of maps. So yeah, I needed this. Apart from the obvious nostalgia bait that I was easily on the hook for, Kaiju Wars is a legitimately entertaining game. Playing as the mayor of an under-attack megacity, your unreachable goal is to eliminate the kaiju during each scenario, but the actionable thing to do is to bide time and hold them off while your resident scientist develops a serum to drive them away. It's less of a fight to the death and more about delaying the enemy until you can develop the serum necessary to complete the scenario, making it feel more like a puzzle game than you'd expect, and it's complete with all the trappings that make the Daikaiju formula work. Giant monsters stomping almost unstoppably over weak military units as they traipse around a city smashing everything in sight. Throw in a progression system for veteran units, deck builder mechanics, and a strong variety of scenarios to engage in, and there's plenty to love here. Now, I'm not about to make direct allusions to Into the Breach here, despite the noticeable narrative comparatives, but I will say that anyone that's looking for a similar experience will find an enjoyable diversion to be had. So if you just so happen to be a fan of that particular game, perhaps consider giving Kaiju Wars a shot. While the nostalgia bait Foolish Mortals employed most certainly put the game on my radar and perhaps further down on my Game of the Year list than it probably should be, I feel that it's still worthy of being on it. Sony had a pretty good run this year of exclusives, even if one of them just happened to be an unnecessary remake to a game that's less than a decade old and had already been remastered. But let's not get into that. Instead, we need to talk about God of War Ragnarok, the second and final part of the arc of the Norse saga for our hero? Anti-hero? Protagonist, let's go with that. Protagonist, one-man slaughterhouse Kratos, who must once again bring his axe to bear. While I can't say I've ever been a God of War fan, considering that in the original run I didn't even finish the first game, I really fell for the 2018 entry thanks to superb writing and a story that actually wanted to do something different than just standard Norse mythology tropes, culminating in a foreboding prophecy and an excellent in-game teaser. Ragnarok starts off and delivers on these things in spades in just the first 15 minutes. God of War Ragnarok does all the right things when it comes to sequels in my mind. It directly addresses every conceivable plotline started in the first game, mainline, teased or otherwise, and pretty much answers every question you had left lingering. What happened with Freya? Boom, she's chasing you within the first 2 minutes of the start of the game. Is there anywhere for the combat to grow? Bang, a new weapon class shakes up the variety and offers more options to engage in combat. What is Odin like? Bam! Richard Schiff's performance slaps you in the face with a quality throughout it, depicting a vindictive and manipulative leader for whom not even his children are indispensable in the eyes of his machinations. Richard Schiff, a favorite actor of mine from his days in The West Wing, absolutely steals every scene he's in, and I would honestly be surprised if he wasn't holding a BAFTA award with his name on it come February. Ragnarok is a quality experience throughout, even if it feels more like a direct sequel than a more refined evolution of the 2018 game's methods and mechanics. While it is indeed fun to dive into the Fimbulwinter-affected world and now experience all 9 realms that the Yggdrasil tree connects, the seams feel a tad more visible now, especially now that we're 5 years on from Breath of the Wild's revolutionary open-world design. Still, I fully understand that it'd be stupid to throw out half of your design paradigm systems that you previously built, but I will say that following the same climbing and linear path design methods that came to life with Uncharted 1 is starting to feel considerably old. These may provide aches to the experience, but these pains are outweighed by the quality of the narrative, the improved combat variety, and the very satisfying conclusion to this saga that makes it feel like an unabashedly epic yarn. And for once, epic is not hyperbole to describe the journey at hand. God of War Ragnarok is pretty much the best case scenario that Cory Barlog and Sony Santa Monica could have hoped for in this 2-part story, delivering in almost every department and creating a very memorable experience throughout. You don't need to take my word for it though. If you have a PS4 or PS5, and you played the 2018 game, then I'm sure that I'm preaching to the choir here. But if for some unknown reason you decided to hold off, trust me when I say that it'll be worth your wait. I swear to God, there's some background middle management director at Sony that has a vindictive agenda against Guerrilla's Horizon franchise. This person has been intentionally trying to sabotage Guerrilla's efforts for years, and the only effective means by which they continue to do so is they somehow have full creative control over the final release date of the game, and they keep choosing the absolute worst window possible. 5 years ago, it was February 28th for the original Zero Dawn, which was followed up just a handful of days later by The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and the launch of the Nintendo Switch. This year, yeah, the guys struck again. This time choosing February again, and in their infinite cruelty, choosing to launch just days before Elden Ring. Launching in Fuckuary should already be a crime, but good lord, that's just cruel. Thank God that Forbidden West is a good game. Hell, I'd say it's pretty damn good. Aloy's original journey was one that I'd been interested in, but certainly wasn't my priority when it first came out. And when I finally did play Zero Dawn, while I enjoyed my time with it, It certainly felt like Guerrilla was having some growing pains going on, having gone from linear first-person shooters and transitioning to a third-person open-world adventure. Though I will say that their Frozen Wilds expansion did considerable work to address some shortcomings. All told, though, while I was interested to see where the franchise would head next, I wasn't necessarily super excited about Forbidden West. I am pleased to report that my uneasiness at best and fears at worst, while not unfounded, do seem to have been strongly worked on with this 5 years on sequel. Compared to Zero Dawn, Forbidden West sports an extra layer of polish, while adding better traversal options and far more depth to the narrative. The entire mystery of the first game was the question of how the world ended. This time around we follow up with the logical next question. What is trying to end the world again? Aloy's adventure to find the answer to this question is one that is engaging and surprising throughout, as she journeys towards the Pacific through Nevada and the shattered remains of California. As I mentioned with God of War Ragnarok, Forbidden West does what I really like in a sequel. Answers the direct questions left over more satisfactorily, and refuses to dance around holes in the narrative. The lore setup here in fact led towards one of the most exciting pairs of hours I've had all year, as the game reached its climax and we discovered the implications of what is to come in the inevitable conclusion to this 3-part saga. Once those credits rolled, God man, I became invested for the first time in the franchise. I need to know. And I'm going to find out come day one when Horizon 3 arrives sometimes before I hit my midlife crisis. Right, Sony? Right? Look, I'm going to be real with you. There's going to be at least one vampire pun as I talk about this next game. It's just a matter of fact that cannot be avoided. You have been warned. Now, let's talk about this year's rather excellent time suck that is Vampire Survivors. Though I'd heard plenty of compliments and praise as to the game when it launched last January, I always wait with the early access games until they reach 1.0 status. This meant that I didn't get my hands on Vampire Survivors until October, and I am sad to report that I probably cut my productivity in half in the weeks that followed. To date, I have put around 35 hours in the game's anti-bullet hell experience, unlocking new characters, weapons, and stages, while delving even deeper into the secrets it contains within, and thanks to the newly released DLC, which adds a bunch more of everything, I have the distinct feeling that I'm going to be very preoccupied until the Dead Space remake arrives. Okay, look. At this point, I'm struggling to provide substantive arguments for why Vampire Survivors is near the top of my list this year, but finding something to say that hasn't been echoed by vast swaths of other people is a near insurmountable obstacle. I could bend your ear talking about the rewarding gameplay loop, the thrill of discovering each map's secrets, the struggle of first starting out and even trying to last 30 minutes, but if I did, by the time I got to something that you actually not heard before, you'll likely have a bloody stump where your otology hole usually is. It's an amazing game, and the best bang for your buck in 2022. Perhaps of the last decade even. You just have to play it. There are no other words I can spare that are original as to why you need this in your life. It's almost single-handedly spawned an entire new genre of games all by itself, with clones coming out the wazoo, and no doubt inspiring a ton of indie developers in their next endeavors. It's a $5, low-poly indie game that found itself on the goddamn stage of the Game Awards. It's fucking good. I'm just going to stop here. It's available for cheap, offers dozens of hours of fun, and has a ton of great secrets throughout with the promise of continuing content drops and updates for some time to come. Do the smart thing, just buy it and let it sink its fangs into you. You won't regret it. Let me tell you a story. There I am, exploring the hellhole that is the flying city of Farum Azula, when, as I'm climbing a rise, I notice off to my left a small drop-off. Making progress forward to the next shard, I double backed, taking out the enemies that would have been lying in wait had I been coming the other way, and decided to take that drop down, which led to a crumbling shelf just a short distance away from one of the many eternal tornadoes that keep this ancient vestibule of a once thriving civilization aloft. As I'm wandering around, a small ensconcement provides a button prompt. I do so, and my character lies down within it, crossing her arms as if laying in a coffin for their final rest. A cinematic takes hold, and the world loses most of its color as time slowly stops before beginning to reverse. The wreckage and rumble around me beginning to reassemble itself from the tornado that wrought its savage end in some age long ago. The screen fades to white before returning my character to consciousness, who awakens in a gigantic arena. Hovering in the center of it lies a two-headed dragon unlike any other seen in the game, a massive beast of rotten flesh and weathered bone, reminiscent of King Ghidorah in a fashion that only the artists at From Software could depict. As the camera controls return to me, I charge at the name beast, Dragon Lord Placidusax, and thus began the most exciting fight of my 130-hour journey with Elden Ring. This is but one small, brief story that millions like me have experienced since February 5th, 2022, when this monster of a game arrived and took the world by storm. My usage of the term monster to describe Elden Ring is a decidedly appropriate adjective in every conceivable way it could be used. Monstrous in size, monstrous in variety, monstrous in challenge, monstrous in addictiveness. To use anything less is a disservice. I consider myself to be a selective FromSoft fan, typically avoiding those that delve into medieval dark fantasy in favor of those with more varied settings. The Bloodborns and Sekiros they deliver. I would be lying if I said I didn't feel sort of peer pressure to pick up Elden Ring given this preference I have, but the arguments for it were substantial. FromSoft deciding to try an open-world formula with writing by a celebrated Western author with the seeming promise that I wouldn't have to turn to hour-long YouTube videos and detailed essays to find out just what the fucking story is. So, I bought it, and in the long run, I'm glad I did. But man, I have to admit that the first 20 hours were kind of a hellish. Once I got past that hump, though, I had a heck of a time enjoying it, even with sour spots every now and then. Radon, I'm specifically looking at you. Perhaps the best part of Elden Ring is just how much it feels like a culmination of From Software's 12 years spent trying to perfect the formula of hard but fair, punishing but engaging gameplay, with notes seemingly transposed from every facet their franchise has put out since the original Demon's Souls in 2009. Brad, if you're listening to this, I want my copy back. Now, I can't honestly tell whether Hidetaka Miyazaki and his team at FromSoft are genius sadists, sadistic geniuses, both or neither, but it's more than fair to declare that Elden Ring is very much a once-in-a-generation game, comparable to the accomplishments of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild by taking the best of what the developer is capable of and breathing new life into it in ways that just seem beyond the studio's wheelhouse capability. I don't need to say anything further. Elden Ring is one of the best games of 2022, and for a good time to come, it will remain a pillar of reference for the entire gaming industry for open world design and challenging combat. The FromSoft formula isn't for everyone, but for those that dare, it's well worth the time, the energy, and the social deprivation that comes from picking up the controller and beginning your own pursuit of the fabled ring. This past year, I have played a considerable amount of games. I conquered the lands between and took the title of Elden Lord. I fought robotic dinosaurs across the post-apocalyptic Southwest. I faced destiny against almost unstoppable gods in hopes of changing my fate. I mixed potions and changed lives in an effort to save my soul. I battled giant monsters, faced endless waves of ghouls, risked my life and time in this world to avenge my fallen master, traversed an alien invasion to reunite with my family, and prevented a supernatural cataclysm. But for all those hundreds of hours of playing games in 2022, it was the story of a sister's journey to save her little brother that had me on the edge of my seat, following them on a tale that pitched them against the cruel, superstitious adults of medieval France that had at times shocked, left me breathless, smiling, and in tears. That was what A Plague Tale Requiem was to me, and it is my game of the year for 2022. I regret to admit that I wasn't infatuated with the first chapter, Innocence, when it arrived several years ago, and only last year, after a next generation patch arrived for it, did I give the game a shot, uncertain if it had a future. I am so glad I did. My partially educated assumption about A Plague Tale was that it was going to be about traversing the rat-infested lands of southern France while being pursued by the Inquisition. A novel setup, perhaps, but not one that seemed like anything more than a perhaps 10-hour escort mission based on a singular mechanic. What I got instead was a supernatural mystery thriller, wrapped at times within a veil of horror, where combat properly reflected its awkwardness in its teenage and largely terrified protagonist, Amicia de Rune. I got a depiction of a young child, her brother Hugo, struggling with a disease that has direct connections to the plague itself, that is swallowing up the countryside everywhere they go. While trying to grow up in a cruel world where cults and evil men vie to use him for their own purposes. I got an ending that was strong enough to stand on its own as the siblings, their mother, and their best friend rode off in a wagon to the future. Destination unknown, but the horrors of the journey now behind them. And as the credits rolled, I realized that I had missed out on one of the best games of 2019. The second chapter, Requiem, is, in all regards possible, an expansion and enhancement on what Innocence established. Combat feels more varied, stealth finds itself with significantly more options for traversal and exploration approaches, and the threat is far, far greater than it has ever been before. And it is this threat that had me coming back for more than any other factor. I would be doing you an absolute disservice by describing any particular plot points or main story drives, but I would also be remiss if I didn't mention perhaps my most narratively engaging moment of the year. Early on, Amicia rushes to rescue her best friend, Lucas, who has been captured by guards attempting to stifle the local populace from learning that the rat plague has come to their city. Freeing Lucas, as guards yell demands and orders for her to surrender, the trauma of the events of Innocence finally catch up to her, and Amicia decries no, instead reacting violently in as vicious a manner as possible, bringing death to all who try to enter the barn after them. Lucas cries, begging her to stop, to follow him and escape while they still have time, but Amicia refuses, instead continuing on her violent stand against the much larger, much better armed, and much more unforgiving soldiers that bear down on the pair. The music swells as the PTSD of the past year explodes outwards in a cavalcade of violence. Amicia is no longer a victim to be reviled, hunted, beaten, and torn down. Anyone who dares to harm her, her family, her friends, or her innocent little brother will quickly find their skulls caved in with a stone, their throats slit, their hearts run through with an arrow, their flesh consumed by the rat plague. Amicia is innocent no more. Requiem is rife with moments like this one, where the duo faces the terrors of the plague as cults and the superstitious citizens of 14th century France hunt for them. One scared of the growing powers of the macula that gestate within him and bring pain to the world, the other determined to save her little brother from the disease's clutches by any means necessary. Hugo and Amicia's tale is one that holds little back. As the credits roll this time around, it's sad but poignant, equally tear-inducing for you as it is appropriate for the characters. A Plague Tale Requiem is a game about sickness and impending death, about love and desperation and trauma, and facing supernatural horrors in a world that alternates between being incapable and refusing to try and to understand them. It's not just my favorite story of the year, it's also the best one. Whatever developer Sobo decides their next project shall be, I'm certain they'll have my money come day one. Alright gang, that does it for me. Thanks for watching. I'm honestly shocked that the guys finally decided to get these videos done inside of the year that they're meant for. Heck, if time had been a little bit more on my side, then we'd have all of them done before the calendar year turned over. But hey, it is what it is. Like what everyone else has been saying, 2023 is looking to be gigantic. Perhaps the best year for gaming since 2007. And it's all going to start raining down on us in just a couple weeks. So please stay tuned, visit our Discord, and stop in for our weekly podcast recordings on Twitch. Thank you again. Happy New Year.